Sophia had always believed that true love was something that could survive anything, but her three closest friends believed love was only beautiful when it came with expensive restaurants, luxury cars, designer clothes, and a bank account large enough to make people jealous. That was why the moment Sophia introduced them to Daniel, the man she had been secretly dating for almost 6 months, they laughed so hard that Sophia wished the ground would open beneath her feet. Daniel had arrived outside the elegant rooftop restaurant on an old black motorcycle, wearing a simple faded jacket, plain jeans, and a helmet scratched from years of use. He parked the motorcycle carefully, removed his helmet, and walked towards Sophia with a warm smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said gently. "The traffic was terrible." Sophia smiled and reached for his hand, but before she could introduce him properly, her friend Vanessa burst into laughter. "Wait, this is Daniel?" she asked, looking from his worn motorcycle to his inexpensive clothes. "The motorcycle guy?" Emma covered her mouth, trying not to laugh, while Rachel whispered, "Sophia, you were serious?" Sophia felt her face become hot. "Yes," she replied calmly. "Daniel is my boyfriend." Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. "Girl, you went from rejecting rich men to dating a motorcycle rider?" Daniel simply smiled and pulled out a chair for Sophia. "Nice to meet you all," he said politely. "I've heard a lot about you." Emma looked at his old watch and asked mockingly, "So, Daniel, what do you do?" "Deliver food." The table erupted in laughter. Daniel remained calm. "I ride sometimes," he replied. "I like motorcycles." Vanessa leaned closer to Sophia and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You can still change your mind. It's not too late." Sophia looked at Daniel, expecting him to be embarrassed, but he only squeezed her hand under the table. That small gesture made her heart ache with love. Daniel had never cared what other people thought. He had met Sophia 6 months earlier when her car broke down during a heavy rainstorm. She had been standing helplessly beside the road, trying to call a mechanic, when Daniel stopped his motorcycle and offered to help. He fixed the problem enough to get her car running again, refused payment, and disappeared before she could even properly thank him. Sophia later discovered that he worked in motorcycle repair, or at least that was what he wanted people to believe. Over the following weeks, they kept meeting by coincidence until those coincidences became dates, conversations, laughter, and eventually love. Daniel never took her to expensive restaurants. Instead, he took her to small cafes, quiet parks, roadside food stalls, and beautiful places outside the city where they could talk without anyone disturbing them. Sophia loved those moments because Daniel listened to her dreams instead of asking about her family's money. He remembered the smallest details about her, including her favorite dessert, the books she loved, and the fact that she became nervous whenever she had to speak in front of a crowd. He never tried to impress her. He simply treated her with respect. But her friends could not understand it. After that dinner, Vanessa pulled Sophia aside. "You're making a huge mistake," she said. "Look at him. He doesn't even have a decent car." Sophia sighed. "I don't care about his car." "You will when you marry him," Rachel replied. "Love doesn't pay bills." Sophia looked at them and said, "Maybe not, but money doesn't guarantee happiness either." They laughed and called her naive. What they didn't know was that Daniel wasn't poor at all. His real name was Daniel Alexander, the founder and majority owner of Alexander Mobility Group, one of the fastest-growing transportation and motorcycle technology companies in the country. His company owned manufacturing plants, logistics networks, electric motorcycle patents, luxury dealerships, and several international investments. Financial magazines estimated his personal wealth at more than $3 billion. Yet Daniel deliberately lived quietly. Years earlier, after inheriting his father's company, he had become surrounded by people who wanted his money. Women suddenly wanted to date him, men wanted to be his friends, and distant relatives appeared whenever they needed something. Daniel became exhausted by the attention. He wanted to know whether someone could love him without knowing the size of his bank account. So he created a private life away from the billionaire world. He wore ordinary clothes, rode an old motorcycle, rented a modest apartment, and introduced himself simply as Daniel. Only his closest security team and a handful of executives knew about his secret identity. Sophia was the first woman he had ever truly trusted. He had planned to tell her everything when he was certain that she loved him for him. Unfortunately, the moment he had been trying to avoid came sooner than expected. A few weeks later, Sophia's friends invited her to a luxurious charity gala hosted by one of the city's most powerful business families. Vanessa insisted that Sophia come without Daniel because, as she said, "This isn't a place for motorcycle riders." Sophia refused. "If Daniel isn't welcome, neither am I." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Fine. Bring him. We'll see how long he lasts." That evening, Daniel arrived on his motorcycle wearing a simple black suit. Sophia smiled when she saw him. "You look handsome." He kissed her forehead. "You look beautiful." As they entered the ballroom, hundreds of wealthy guests were talking beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Sophia immediately noticed several people staring at Daniel. Vanessa whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself." Daniel ignored her. Suddenly, a senior businessman named Mr. Harrison rushed toward them. His expression changed the moment he saw Daniel. He stopped, stared at him for several seconds, and then said, "Sir." Daniel quietly raised one finger to his lips, warning him to remain silent. But before Harrison could respond, Vanessa interrupted. "Mr. Harrison, this is Sophia's boyfriend. He's a motorcycle mechanic." Harrison looked confused. "Mechanic?" Daniel smiled politely. "Something like that." Harrison nodded slowly, understanding the secret. "Of course, sir." Vanessa laughed. "See? Even he doesn't know what to call him." Sophia became uncomfortable, but Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her back. Moments later, the host stepped onto the stage and announced that the evening's main guest had arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and chairman of Alexander Mobility Group, Mr. Daniel Alexander." The entire ballroom fell silent. Sophia froze. Her heart began racing. She slowly turned toward Daniel. The man standing beside her suddenly looked completely different. Not because his face had changed, but because she now understood every mysterious detail about him. The old motorcycle, the simple clothes, the strange phone calls, the executives who always seemed nervous around him, the expensive restaurants he avoided, the apartment he claimed was all he needed. Daniel looked at Sophia with guilt in his eyes. "Sophia?" She stepped backward. "You're Daniel Alexander?" He nodded. "Yes." Vanessa's mouth dropped open. Rachel looked as if she had seen a ghost. Emma whispered, "That's impossible." The host continued describing Daniel's achievements, revealing that he was worth billions and had recently donated millions to hospitals and schools. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel took a slow breath. "Because I wanted to know if you loved me without the money." Her eyes filled with tears. "And you thought I didn't?" "No," he said quickly. You were different from everyone else. That's why I was afraid to tell you. I didn't want money to change what we had. Sophia walked closer to him. You should have trusted me. Daniel lowered his head. You're right. She looked at the man she loved and realized that despite the secret, the person she had fallen for was still the same Daniel who had helped her beside the road, remembered her favorite dessert, and held her hand when she was nervous. She finally smiled through her tears. I fell in love with the man on the motorcycle, not the billionaire. Daniel smiled for the first time that evening. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Behind them, Vanessa, Emma, and Rachel stood speechless. The same man they had mocked was now being greeted by CEOs, ministers, celebrities, and international investors. Vanessa finally approached Sophia. I'm sorry. Sophia looked at her quietly. You didn't have to like Daniel's motorcycle. You only needed to respect my choice. Rachel lowered her eyes. We judged him without knowing anything. Daniel interrupted gently. And that's why I don't blame you. People often judge what they can see. He looked at Sophia. But the important thing is what we choose to see after we learn the truth. Months later, Daniel and Sophia became engaged. He didn't propose in a palace or on a private island. Instead, he took her back to the exact roadside where they had first met. He parked his old motorcycle, knelt beside her, and opened a small box containing a simple but breathtaking ring. Sophia, he said, before you knew my name, my company, or my money, you knew my heart. You loved the man who stopped on a motorcycle in the rain. I want to spend the rest of my life being that man for you. Sophia cried as she said yes. Their wedding became one of the biggest social events of the year, but Sophia remembered something Daniel had told her long before anyone knew his identity. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy someone who stays when there's nothing to gain. And that became the lesson everyone around them remembered. The friends who once mocked Sophia for dating a poor motorcycle rider eventually understood that they had been measuring Daniel's worth by the wrong thing. His motorcycle had been old, his clothes had been simple, and his lifestyle had looked ordinary, but his character had been priceless from the beginning. Sophia never regretted choosing him. Daniel never regretted hiding his wealth long enough to discover her true heart. And every time they rode together on that same old motorcycle, Sophia would laugh and tell him, you know, billionaire or not, you're still my motorcycle rider. Daniel would smile, put his helmet on her head, and reply, and you're still the only person in the world who loved me before she knew I was rich.